Ketamine, um, I think, is stigmatized as things that I hear, for example, horse tranquilizer, um, that, that it's very widely, misused recreationally. I mean, statistically, compared to, say, MDMA, not as much.
Hi, Jennifer. How's it going?
It's going well. Thank you. Thank you, Swati. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining me today. I mean, I'm really excited to chat with you a little bit more, learn about the mission of Tripp, and about your own background, if you don't mind letting us know.
Yeah, I think it sounds great.
So, can you let us know how did you end up in this space and how did you begin your work with Tripp?
Yeah, so Trip manifested last year in 2021 as a result of some gaps that I was noticing in the industry and in my practice as well. I've been offering ketamine-assisted psychotherapy now for a few years and facilitated over 300 individual sessions. And subsequently have been teaching other clinicians how to use this approach, the approach that I've been using for the last few years. And within those gaps, noticing that, I mean, there's definitely a void, or um, as in so many other industries, lack of representation of, um, you know, people who identify as female, non-white clinicians, providers, and and also the research piece, which is really important to me as a clinical researcher, in addition to being a psychiatric provider here in Tucson. So I wanted to be able to offer trainings to underrepresented clinicians, um, including people who identify as female, and offer some scholarship opportunities, and then be able to accept funds, grants for clinical research, and including more inclusivity also of female researchers and BIPOC researchers, scientists. So that's really how Tripp, the Transpersonal Research Institute of Psychotherapeutic Psychedelics, came to fruition. And yeah, here we are about a year later. And
That's
we've
wonderful.
Thank you. Yes, it has been. We've been able every training this year in 2022. We've been able to offer a full scholarship to a BIPOC provider uh, at each training. So that's, I'm really proud of that, and that's an important part of our mission.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, just really quickly on that note, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are as to why this space is lacking so much of that type of diversity and why it is important to have that.
Well, it's a loaded question. I think there's a number of reasons. I think um, one, opportunity in general. This is an emerging field. It's a young field, so there in general are not there are more and more trainings becoming available. They can be, quite cost prohibitive and lengthy. So having a 4-day experiential training, I think, is helpful for a lot of folks, and feasible. So I do my best to keep the cost down. But to the question, I think we're still, in the West, in the States, we're still in a fairly male dominated culture overall. And, not to say that every, white male is responsible for that. I'm not saying that at all. Just that this is just another example, another industry arena where we're seeing that. And I think it's in many ways more of the same.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with that. I think it's important for us to address this. And the fact that you make that a core part of your mission statement with the Institute is just fantastic and something that I really like to bring up because I think that just needs to be a little bit more widespread and apparent within this space, just because if we're working towards a more diverse kind of realm for the future, making sure that everybody has access, this needs to be a part of the conversation. So thanks so much for going over that with me. I would love to chat a little bit more about the work that you are specifically doing with Tripp and your experiential ketamine retreats. So what exactly makes these retreats unique, and how do you approach this process with your clients and guests?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Thank you. And there are two distinctions. So obviously through the pandemic, Trip, we've not been offering retreats, um, but this is in the coming year in 2023 something we'll definitely have on the calendar again. Um, and I think with those, one of the key differences in other retreats is the integrative approach, the holistic approach. And that is, just as with training clinicians and my approach to ketamine assisted psychotherapy, ceremony is an important component. Um, you know, having different healing modalities available, including breath work, including time in nature for the retreats, and sound baths, body work, um, both being worked on, and then also, doing our own work through offering some yoga and having a teacher, a guide, to do that. And so I think, really truly incorporating, a holistic approach, mind, body, spirit, or energy, if you will, with the retreats. Um, and with the trainings, I think what sets those apart similarly are, including, I mean, really emphasizing the importance of preparation of psychotherapeutic approaches with specific populations. The importance of integration and inclusion of ceremony. And I've spoken about this before. Just the importance of a holistic approach and not leaving out the spiritual component, because our clients, people, all of us, most of us, I should say, are quite hungry for, for like spiritual practice, incorporating that. And it's very, individualized. And I'm not speaking about religion, but um, the experiences, the experiential, right, experiences in the trainings are often spiritual in nature. And so it's important that, that that we speak to this, that we no longer ignore this or shy away from it, both in practice, I think, with psychedelic medicines, and also in research.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm glad that you brought that up. This is something that I have had chats with others in the space about in the past. Just the lack of emphasis of the spiritual component when such a significant part of the healing process is rooted within that. And so that's actually something that I would love to talk to you a little bit more about, and how you feel something like ketamine assisted psychotherapy, is able to touch on that spiritual element. Like, what exactly is spiritual about a ketamine experience, if you had to put that in your own words?
No, gladly, gladly. And, as somebody who has personally had experiential ketamine opportunities, we, what often comes up for both, clinicians coming through the trainings and clients, patients that I work with, is ultimately because of the dissociative nature of ketamine, more so than other psychedelic medicines, we experience ourselves in a very expansive, formless way. And we we come to recognize that we are, if you will, energetic beings having a physical experience. And I think that's sort of the abbreviated version, is that this medicine, because of that dissociative nature, really catalyzes these expansive journeys.
Mhm. And those are so difficult to put into words. Like I hear you explaining it in a way that makes the most sense for kind of the average listener to relate to, but it's so difficult to actually materialize through language. And that's something that I would love for just the psychedelic community in general to and psychedelic science to maybe put more of an emphasis on. Like, how exactly is this experience altering your state of being, mind, physically, spiritually? Like, what exactly does this feel like to the individual? And how can we make sure that people are prepared for something like this? Do you find that your retreats and your trainings and experiences are also nurturing the spiritual kind of integration aftermath?
Yes, yes, for definitely and part of this of course, is emerged, if you will, from my own clinical practice, right? How I work with individuals with this medicine and this approach, and it's really important that we honor and respect each individual and their current belief system, right? We want to use language that doesn't one turn them off, or potentially rupture, the therapeutic alliance or trust, because there's certainly been a lot of trauma throughout history around, within religious communities on a micro and macro, right? And so there is a great emphasis in terms of the intakes, the evaluations or assessments, when folks come through trainings and through, again, my individual work around, okay, do they have a spiritual practice? What are their spiritual beliefs? Because we want to make sure, again, that we're using, for example, I open and close each session. I open and close each training. And, you know, we want to be mindful and sensitive around, um, people, again, their stigma, but also their beliefs and potential trauma that has come up. So that's my approach, is really just asking the right questions on the front end, so that we're aware of where people are on their spiritual journey, if they even have a spiritual practice, and what that word, or what faith maybe means to them
Mm. Yeah, that's an
currently.
important one too. Absolutely. I think some people don't even realize that they are spiritual until they have their experience, right? Like, it's something that comes out through the process, and it's something that, they're experiencing the ineffability, the awe that they, once had during that time. And it's so difficult to put into words, but that ultimately is that experience for them. And it's opening up that door now to be able to be further nurtured, which is like, just so incredible and fascinating about this type of medicine compared to, regular pharmaceutical drugs.
It is. It really is. And I think, as the rollout of some of these other medicines, right, that we're seeing in phase 3 clinical trials, um, become available. And certainly, this is clinically focused, clinical use, right, which is a little bit different than recreational use. But we're not going to be able to, as clinicians, as healthcare providers, skirt around or ignore the topic of these ineffable, very spiritual or mystical experiences anymore in practice. It won't be optional. So I think it's
Mhm.
important that people are being trained and feel clinicians are being trained and empowered to one, be able to assess, ask those right questions, and tailor their approach to their practice and each individual based on that person's culture, beliefs, and really honoring and respecting that, whether they identify as atheist or Catholic or Buddhist or simply spiritual. So
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
we need some specialized training, options for that. We certainly aren't getting that in academia, I can tell you for sure. Right.
That's so true, and yeah, that's a great perspective too. I think that there is a lack of diversity in personal spiritual belief that people have access to when they are in this space, you know, and that's actually something that I have experienced with one retreat that I've been on, where that program actually said that they will cater to you depending on what your personal beliefs are, whether you want to take a more like yogic framework, whether you're more Christian or Catholic, even, we can speak on that. I think that that is such an incredible skill and component because that is a part of the container that they are holding for you, right? Like the way that they speak about the experience, the medicine, the aftermath of how you're integrating that medicine into your own life, your ethos is heavily based within these different areas. And if it doesn't resonate with you, are you getting what you need from that experience or not, right? So that's interesting that you bring that up. I'm glad that you did.
Yes, thank you. It's so important, and I'm so happy to hear that type of retreat is available, and that they're really honoring that. I think it is absolutely important, um, and it's important that we affirm people's experiences. That's the other thing is, these folks are going back home to their families, their communities, their friends, and they're trying to articulate like you said, the ineffable, you know, the indescribable, experiences often, and and that can feel isolating, and that can feel unintentionally, right, invalidating. And so it's not that we have to be an expert in every, religious sect or belief. It's simply that we have our own, um, you know, we're resourced, if we're facilitating these experiences, that we can, if needed, help get folks plugged into whatever resonates for them post cap or post psychedelic experience for integration
Hence
and beyond.
that kind of holistic approach that you speak on, right? And I think that that's a word that I hear often, to be honest, in this space. People are like, you know, our model is holistic, but how holistic is it? Is it holistic in the sense that you're offering different health modalities, or are you actually touching on different elements of the human experience, which I personally see as more holistic as a practice versus, you know, offering different types of yoga, you know?
Right. And maybe even a better word is individualized, right? Person
Yes.
centered.
Person-centered, absolutely. Yeah, that's wonderful. I would love to know what your thoughts are on just the general consensus towards ketamine right now. Like, what are some of the misconceptions that you hear often that would maybe prevent people from actually experiencing this? And is it for them?
Yes, thank you for asking. And honestly, I love these. I look at these as opportunities when I am in a situation, whether it's doing like a small community talk for a local psychedelic society, or, speaking to clinicians. And so, again, some of I think, in terms of our like lay community, folks who maybe aren't in healthcare, for example, or even those that are, ketamine, um, I think, is stigmatized as things that I hear, for example, horse tranquilizer, um, that, that it's very widely, misused recreationally. I mean, statistically, compared to, say, MDMA, not as much, really. So, I really love these opportunities because well, one, I'm a nerd. I'm a neuro nerd. That's my, my doctorate background. Um, and so,
That's helpful here.
I yes, it is, because I'm a data person, and so, I'm able in a, a kind way to hopefully just provide some, like, again, legitimate information, some versus misinformation. So, um, I think, racemic ketamine, which is generic ketamine, has been around for a long time, since the late 60s. And, it is used in healthcare. So maybe that's part of the stigma as well. It's maybe viewed more as a, allopathic medicine. Um, and I think maybe it's not as sexy or as exciting as some of the, other psychedelics. in the, in the research community, or that are getting more maybe airtime. And I think it's unfortunate, because ketamine is unique in many ways, from the versatility that we have with the dosing, and the experiences that we can help facilitate, based on where each individual, again, that person-centered framework, where they are on their journey, and their trauma history, how maybe dysregulated their autonomic nervous system is, for example. So we have some really um, practical and beautiful opportunity with the versatility and dosing with ketamine that we don't have with some of the other psychedelic medicines. And so it's not natural or plant-based. I think there's stigma around that, or bias maybe, which again, I always find that interesting, because granted, LSD and MDMA are modeled, they're synthetic, they're modeled after naturally occurring plants, or got with LSD. They're synthetic, as is ketamine. So the other unique thing about this medicine is the mechanism of action. The way in which it works is unique compared to classic psychedelics. And so, as I said, I get really excited when I met with some resistance, because I enjoy, like, and people are like, oh, right. I think often they're receptive when they understand and hear more, like legitimate, maybe scientific backed information about this molecule.
And so, how long does that experience actually last for the individual? Like, what could they expect if they were to join you for a session in the retreat?
Yeah. So the duration depends on how it's administered, and typically longer if it's orally administered. Can be up to an hour longer, depending on gut function and gut motility. Um, it's one of the reasons too. My preference is intramuscular administration, for a number of reasons. But to your question, with a single dose, it can vary. Higher dosing typically lends itself to a little bit longer of an experience, but typically between 20 to 45 minutes with a single dose. I tend to use two doses, so I administer a booster dose. And so folks, the experience tends to be a little bit longer, about maybe 45 minutes, 40 minutes of a psychoactive or psychedelic experience.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that's sounds manageable on on paper, but sometimes that 20-40 minutes that can feel like a lifetime, I think, for some people during that process, right?
Sure, it can, or conversely feels like 5 minutes, right?
Right.
Because,
Yeah,
like,
that element of time is really played with. Would you say especially with ketamine? I'm curious to know your thoughts. I don't know if you have something to compare it to. I know DMT, that's like a big one too, where the duration is so short, but it seems forever, like it goes on forever.
sure, 5-MeO, right? 5-MeO DMT is very short, yeah, in terms of psychoactive. So, yeah, I think most of the time the feedback with ketamine and my own experience is that it seems very, very short, much shorter than, say, the 40-45 minutes. Um, and in terms of other psychedelics, I think it often depends on the experience and the intensity and what arises, and as you mentioned, like the ecosystem in which the experience is occurring. It can seem, and they are much longer, right? I mean, psilocybin, for example, is many hours of an experience, and there can be a plethora of, you know, um, not only psychedelic or non-ordinary experiences, but also emotional, right, experiences. And I think the same is true with racemic ketamine. It's just much more condensed. It's much shorter.
Is there anything that you wish people could know about ketamine that maybe isn't so widespread in common
Yeah,
knowledge?
absolutely. So we're seeing more and more uses backed by data, being published, and you know disseminated. For example, Awaken and alcohol use disorder, right? They're really active in that arena. Certainly, treatment-resistant depression, we have meta-analyses supporting racemic ketamine's efficacy for unremitting depression. My personal passion and population and practice that I work with are folks with complex and or chronic PTSD, often arising from childhood adversity.
Hmm.
And so we don't have, and this was also the focus of my dissertation. And I think that there's such a great opportunity to utilize racemic ketamine in a titrated approach with the dosing um, for treating trauma. And I'm super excited to continue to collect data around that. And primarily, that's again who I work with is folks who have pretty significant ACE scores, and so I'm excited and really am. That's a passion of mine because we need more modalities, and also like I was speaking to the versatility of this particular medicine. One of the things that's so important about that is working with folks who have history of trauma, and we really need to be using a nurturing you know and I call it a feminine, right? We all have feminine and masculine in terms of archetypes. Using a more feminine approach and dosaging and titrating, finessing the how we're working with folks with history of trauma versus going right in and using strictly weight-based dosaging, which can result in bypassing those defenses. What in the psychedelic arena sometimes we call ego dissolution is tends to be a much more masculine, strong-armed approach and
Hmm.
to the psyche. And with these, with folks with a history of trauma, that's not appropriate, and I think can actually be harmful.
So interesting that you bring that up. I think that there is a lot of weight to the idea that a large dose that's going to blast you off is going to completely heal every element of what you're, dealing with. And I think folks really need to understand that opening up that box to that degree is really not safe for a number of people right off the bat. Um, so yeah, that's very interesting. And then comparing it to kind of like the masculine approach versus maybe a more feminine centered approach. Yeah, I think that's something definitely to explore and that people should maybe kind of consider, right? Like I don't know if that's necessarily the narrative that needs to be pushed just because I think there were a couple of papers that had said that reaching that mystical experience, which is what that 5 gram dose for psilocybin, for example, is what brings out the highest level of interpersonal change and emotional change. But I think there's levels to healing, right? There's levels and there's different body compositions for individuals, and they're able to approach things in the way that they need to, not in the way that they should be forced to, right?
Right. I think that it's helpful, and we need to have some general idea around dosages, right? Regardless of the medicine, and certainly with a person-centered approach, right? That's I mean, that's ideal. But I think also who we're working with, like with psilocybin and some of the research, around end of life, and that's a very different population than folks with a history of right childhood adversity and who have developed complex um, traumatic stress, and so. Um, I think the other issue is this, the idea or this, concept of spiritual bypassing. And again, I think that mystical experiences can be absolutely transformative. I mean, however, I think that it can also be, if that's the one size fits all, there's so much in between, that we're so much opportunity for healing in between that is not being allowed or being addressed. And that's really, where my philosophy and approach comes in.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I hope that people understand that too. You don't necessarily have to dive in head first and go for the big experience right away. Like, it's okay. It's very valid, I think, to approach it in the way that feels comfortable and safe for you. And I hope that nobody ever feels pressured that they, need to go beyond their base level line of operating and, comfort with anybody with any experience in this space.
Yes, absolutely. And if, if the setting or the study is, using more of the higher heroic dosing, that there's adequate preparation. Um, and typically in research academic settings, are very, very selective about inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria, like who is a good candidate and a safe candidate. Unfortunately, in clinical practice and with racemic ketamine, and this is probably another reason that there's stigma around this, is the approach has been very, very medicalized, very allopathic, and it's being offered primarily in settings and IV infusion clinics that are not being run by mental health clinicians or practitioners. These are
Mm,
anesthesiologists. These are ER
right.
pain management
Nurse
specialists,
practitioners.
right? That that maybe don't have or include on the team, the interdisciplinary approach, and specifically, you know, mental health support. So there is not preparation. There is, often people are left either in a room by themselves, being monitored remotely, or in a room with other strangers. And, you know, I could see where that would absolutely earn like some negative bias, within, healthcare, mental health care, and also in the psychedelic arena.
Yeah, yeah. And that's something that I'm curious to know what will look like as this continues to scale over time because, there's so many clinics popping up everywhere. I think that that is, the kind of forward approach that people are taking at this time because that is what we have access to. That's going to continue to widen a lot of appeal, I think, to the individual who has tried everything, and there's a lot of us out there, I think. So, yeah, very, very interesting stuff to see. Actually, curious to know what your thoughts are and what you see the future of ketamine therapy looking like for maybe just, I don't know, North America on a larger scale.
And I always say, I mean, I'm biased, of course, by my own experience and background, right, regarding racemic ketamine, and my own bias, right, based on what I have found to be helpful with the folks that I work with. And it really has been the wild, wild west. So, I have concern, I have trepidation, and the future in terms of accessibility, because of the way this particular medicine is being um, extremely liberally prescribed, and from because it can be prescribed at so many different routes for administration, right? So there are organizations, companies that are prescribing home use, and some of those organizations have protocols, that their directions, instructions, remote monitoring in real time. Some don't, and I mean that's concerning in terms of safety to me,
Hmm.
physical safety and psychological safety. I mean, we're inducing a vulnerable state, and with folks who have a history of trauma, through the attachment theory lens, we don't know, their ecosystem and how safe and supportive it really is. So I have concerns, to be sure, and one of my fears is that we're going to see a knee jerk reaction around regulation and how ketamine is regulated, and which is going to further potentially, right, limit accessibility. Um, you know, on the other extreme, this very medicalized approach is, like I said before, we're not hearing much, and with any of these medicines, what's not being largely publicized are negative outcomes, right? People who have, you know, well, for lack of a better word, traumatic psychedelic experiences, in different in different settings, again with different medicines. That's not being, and even within research, right? We're not. That's not being. We're hearing, this like magic bullet, holy grail, and it is exciting. I mean, we're seeing some really positive data and outcomes, so not to minimize that. However, it's equally important that we're also, we're publishing like what has gone amiss, and
Oh yeah.
the shadow, and there is light and shadow in everything, right? And of course, ketamine, was no exception. My future vision, what I would hope is that, and I have, I'm fortunate that the folks that come through, I train many allopathic, non-mental health clinicians, and I think it's really important because they leave here with a very different understanding of this medicine and its potential as a catalyst for healing. That it's not just biomedical or physiological, that there's much more opportunity that's one available, and two being missed with this uber medicalized approach. So I think my mantra in general is middle of the road. So
Yeah.
it needs to be regulated, to some degree, right? We need to have, right, my training is nationally accredited. We need to have trainings that are legitimate and that are being offered by folks who have a relationship with, I think, the medicine. That's my biased opinion. And, you know, but I think with ketamine, we're sort of seeing like what things could look like if it's completely, you know, open and not being regulated, and, clinicians are not being trained enough, within this subspecialty of
Hmm.
mental health care.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fair. And just curious to see how this all unfolds. I mean, I know a lot of us are eagerly anticipating what the rollout of the next couple of years is going to look like as legislation kind of loosens up state to state and, across the world. And so I guess time will tell and let us know, what is going to happen on this larger scale. And hopefully this becomes a way of life for more people and ignites more curiosity and interest in healing.
Yes, we certainly need more. We need more tools. We need more approaches, methods, medicines, to help folks, because, you know, many people do not respond or heal, with the, our approach in Western medicine, right? This disease
Mhm.
driven model. It just doesn't, the same rules don't apply with our psyche and our, um, you know, our wounds, our invisible wounds, if you will.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. So, what is next for you and Tripp, and what is coming up in the near future? Anything to anticipate and look forward to?
Yeah, so we have several trainings on our website, which is trippaz.org, and it's Tripp with two P's, so trippaz.org. We So we have those 4-day experiential trainings coming up next year, and we're also going to be adding a few retreats, and these are going to be, focused for, um, for healers, for helpers. It's been an intense couple of years with the pandemic, and frontline helpers have been, have experienced a lot of secondary trauma, which again is as I mentioned, is a passion of mine, trauma. So really offering some options for them to retreat, for respite, for healing, and for connection. So yeah, that's what's on the horizon. We're continuing in terms of clinical research, collecting data, utilizing a measure called the self-transcendence scale, which was developed by one of my mentors, Dr. Pamela Reed, who is a
Great.
professor at the University of Arizona. And so that we're capturing again some data that pertains to what we've been talking about today, around, not just like shifts in spiritual perspective, but also developmental shifts in terms of our um, our reason for being, our purpose, and our life purposes,
Mhm.
in our search for meaning. And so it captures some of those constructs. um, so um, So yeah, be on the lookout for data, probably in mid 2023, late 2023, some published data around that.
Yeah, that's great. Exciting stuff coming up for sure. If anybody wants to learn a little bit more about yourself, Jennifer, if they want to learn about the research that you're doing, they want to check out some of the retreats and trainings, where can they find you online?
Yeah, so the website I mentioned, the schedule for the trainings are on there. The retreats will be posted on there as well in terms of dates, and the scholarship applications are on there as well for uh, the underrepresented clinicians who have interest and need. So you can submit a scholarship application, and through the website. I have a personal website, jenmontjoy.com, as well, JenMontjoy. And so other podcasts, other um, articles, papers, et cetera, that I've published and contributed to, or can be found there as well. And you can communicate. There's a contact tab on the trippaz.org website as well.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It was really wonderful talking about some of the less spoken about elements of CAP. So, yes, really enjoyed this conversation with you.
Oh, thank you, Swati. Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.